So, Dr. Julie Pham, welcome to Crossing the Line. I'm so glad you're with us. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Listen, I think this is going to be a fun podcast. You're one of those people, Julie, that I can just tell I'm going to like you. We've talked a little bit and before this and kind of prepped, and some people you just know, right? Hey, I'm going to like her, and I've enjoyed our conversation, so I'm going to enjoy this today. Hey, let's do this. Let's kind of think back, and I want to hear your story. So I want you to go back, Julie, to you're like 6, 7 years old, somewhere in that range. What is a day in the life of Julie like when she's a 6 or 7, 8-year old?
So, 6-year elementary school Julie, growing up with 2 younger brothers. My parents worked all the time, and I was independent from a very young age, and I was expected to really help my 2 younger brothers. And I want to share actually a story of something that happened when I was around that age that was
Right.
transformative, which was I was there. I was one of 2 Asian American girls in my class. And my best friend, and Trisha was my best friend, she was the other Asian American girl. I got sick for a week. And then when I came back, she said, I can't be your best friend anymore
Oh,
because because now I'm hanging out with the popular girls. And
oh,
I didn't have any friends. It was hard for me to make friends. And so I actually I ended up talking, I had an imaginary friend in a tree. And I just basically talked to this tree for, I don't know, for the rest of that school year until some other kids moved in and I was able to have friends. And so I would say that early experience was that people can leave. People can leave. And so,
mm.
and later on, what I ended up learning to do was to kind of be what they call floaters in school, where I had actually lots of friends, lots of different groups, instead of being tied to any one person. Because in that, I had this one friend who then left me for the popular kids.
Wow.
And yeah.
Those are such hard lessons in life, Julie. That is, it's we sit here now and reflect, but when you're in that, I mean, it is real and it's hard. And kudos to you for, hey, you were creative enough to create a imaginary friend to cope. We call that, in the psychology world, your coping mechanisms, and
Mhm.
that's great that you did that. But so interesting. I love what you said. I learned a life lesson there, and you carried that with you through your childhood. People leave.
Mhm.
You that's a that
And
that's a
it's not feeling abandoned. It's more, I take it as, oh, well, I can't rely on one person
mm,
for that source of all of my for the source of to have that one relationship. Actually, I should have lots of different relationships and lots of different friendships.
I love that. So it kind of broadened your scope, huh?
Oh, absolutely.
And did I
Absolutely.
hear you say you turned into what you called a floater? Is
Yeah,
that
I
right?
turned into what I call a floater, just having lots of different groups of friends. I didn't want to be identified in any one clique
Love it.
by
So
defined by my group of friends, because sometimes I think when children in high school, particularly
mm,
middle school, high school, you get defined by who you're friends with.
yeah, yeah.
And when I went to college, which was a big public school, it was what I really loved about that was people didn't know me by who I hung out with. People knew me by, oh, we're in history class together. Mhm.
And we're going to go back and talk about you as a junior high and high, but just for a minute, it is really refreshing to get to college and go, oh, thank goodness, the little high school cliques are no more, and people look at you differently. Cool takes on a whole new meaning, if there
Mhm.
is even is such a thing in college. So that's kudos for you for recognizing that. But take me back. So you're a junior. You had childhood. Your best friend said, "Hey, I'm going over here." Your mom and dad are working. You said you grew up where you were very independent. What were some of the things during that time? Let's say you're a child up to junior high, somewhere around in there. The independent. What are things that you learned, and describe some of that independence to us?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was because I was born in Vietnam. My parents and I came here as boat people when I was 2 months old, and so and my parents continued to work in the Vietnamese community. They started a Vietnamese newspaper when I was about 7 years old,
Wow.
and so I was navigating a lot in terms of just translating, in terms of just kind of being their translator in the world, and sometimes it's not because it's actually not because. I mean, actually, when I entered elementary school, I grew up in that period of assimilation, and so it was I then just moved into English. It was just speaking in English slowly because to help that. So it wasn't that I was speaking Vietnamese,
Right.
literally translating from Vietnamese, from English to Vietnamese. It was more of I would listen to what the on the I would call up the operator, the customer service people, and I would hear what they were asking for, and then I would just explain it to my parents in ways that would be easy for them to understand. And I'm
Mm,
literally in elementary, middle school English, right? And then also, I mean, my parents worked all the time, so I understood very much the value of work. Again, I never felt abandoned. It was just like, well, this is the way it is. And so we
yeah.
had this system because I would take care of my two younger brothers. Um, and my mom she would leave me, they would leave me home alone, and there would be a ringing system. It'd be like ring, ring, ring. And I had to pick up the phone. And if I didn't pick
Mhm.
up the phone, then she would have to drive home to check in on
That was
us.
not a good thing.
Yeah, that was not, I mean, and my parents, I mean, they have their own business, so it's flexible, but they had to work. And so I grew up knowing that there was that 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 was it was without a question, like that was important.
Were you the oldest sibling?
Yeah, the oldest and my younger brothers are 2 and 3 years younger. So we're
So
all really tight.
so you really were responsible for them even as a
Mhm.
young child.
Yes.
How did that work? So now we're at 13, 14, 15. You're entering into high school, coming out of junior high. And it is, unfortunately, being cool is important and having friends is important. But yet your parents needed you, and you were having, did that conflict with your social life? Talk to us about that. Because I'm really interested in what made you who you are. And let me tell you this, already you have taught me so much about the importance of being independent. And you said you broke down the language and slowed it down for your parents. You're already leading them, Julie. It's amazing. And we see this pattern in the leaders that we talk to, that you learn from an early age how to be independent and then how to lead others. Anyway, I get excited about
Yeah,
those kind of
yeah.
things. So,
And so,
so
I
you,
mean, it wasn't really until I would say seventh grade where I actually started to make friends. I mean, I
seventh
had
grade.
different, yeah. So I had different friends, but there was but really it was like in seventh grade when I started to have these different friendships, and that's where I would say the floating started. And so, I mean, and actually I'm we were all independent. My brothers and I were also all taught to kind of be independent. And I remember um, we had three options for food because it would be coming home, and then in the fridge there would be Costco pizza, there would be spaghetti, and there would be this Vietnamese caramelized pork dish. And so we had three options. And so for me, I never thought of variety as an important thing. And so it was just like, it's just like, what are my three options? Because like my mom would she'd pick us up, drop us off, and then go back to work. And so it's like, okay, we're on our own. And then also once I turned 16, I was driving. I mean, there was no question, because then I became the driver for my family, because up to that point, my parents had to drive us around and it was a burden
Right.
for them. And so, Larry, I got into like 4 car accidents before I turned 18.
Oh,
And in each time, my parents are like, yeah, you got to keep going. And so I actually think that really taught me a lesson of risk tolerance later on in
mm.
life, because it was like, well, and I mean, I'm really fortunate that in all of those, no one got hurt. It was really just the vehicles. I mean, some of the vehicles got really banged up, but no one got hurt in any of those four. And it taught me that, things happen and we got to keep moving. And so, yes, I would say that and then in high school, I got really involved in the school newspaper and debate and all these different extracurricular activities. And I really tried to just have different groups of friends. So even at lunchtime, I would sit here for like 15 minutes, and then I would go over to another table, and it was floating. Someone years later told me, oh, I saw those kids and I always felt sad for them. And I was like, oh, I didn't, I thought it was cool that I have lots of different groups of friends. And I still have that to this day. I actually feel like have lots of different, belong to lots of different circles.
So you brought that into who you are as an adult.
Hmm.
Wow, that's a valuable lesson, and I think a very important one as a leader is that you can get to where other people are, even translated into leadership principles, if you will. All right, so here we are. We're in high school. You're floating. You're in a lot of different things. You're learning to debate. Obviously, you're involved in the newspaper. Amazing. So, what happens next? Take it from there and tell us the next piece of the story.
Hmm. So I befriended, I think it was a sophomore or a junior in high school. I had some very ambitious friends who basically said, hey, you don't have to go to school in state. You could go to school out of state. You could go to, and so I had friends who were applying to Ivy Leagues. And so, I mean, I always thought, okay, I'll stay in Seattle, go to University of Washington. That's what most of my friends did. And yet I had some friends who were just, you should strive for more.
Mm,
And so, and I think so much of our life is actually, so much of what we do is influenced by who we surround ourselves with. And so having a few friends who were just super ambitious made me think, oh, well, maybe I should apply out of state. And so I ended up applying and getting into Berkeley. And so that's where I went for my undergrad.
oh wow.
And that's really where I became the person that I like. It's such a, and I'm a big believer in things happen for a reason,
Mm,
because my first choice school is actually Wellesley, which is the opposite of Berkeley, literally, right?
wow.
Like geographically,
Oh
and
yeah.
so different, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
I got waitlisted there, and I remember talking to someone. It was one of those college interviews, and it was a student there at the time. She's like, "Yeah, there's a lot of diversity here. We even have people on financial aid." And I was like,
Wow.
okay. So
All right.
this is the mid 90s. And I was like, all right. And so I'm actually really glad I went to Berkeley.
Oh
Um,
man, that's
yeah.
awesome. So, what was it like at Berkeley?
Well, it's Berkeley's just such a special place. I love California. I gotta say, first of all, I love California.
Love-
Um, I remember my first semester there, because in a way, I was a foreigner and I had a bunch of friends who were also out of staters. And then I was like, why do Californians think it's just the best place? And then after a semester, it's like, California is
It's
amazing.
a blessed place. Yeah.
California is an amazing
I
place.
love it.
And I thought I was going to study, I told my parents I was going to study business law because Berkeley is a great law school and a great business school. And I fell in love with history. My
Mm,
first semester, I
mm,
just fell in love with my first history class.
mm,
And I really think of history as the intersection. It's at the crossroads of social science and humanities.
mm.
So if
That's
you think
good.
of social science,
Right.
social scientists are looking for truth because they believe there's such a thing, right? There's empirical truth. In
Right.
humanities, everything is a story and there is no such thing as truth. And so I think history as a discipline, more than any other discipline, sits
Mm,
right at that intersection,
mm,
that tension between truth and fiction. And
mm-hmm.
like we're striving for truth because we believe there's truth, and yet we kind of know that there's no truth. And so we're constantly
Wow.
struggling with that. So and I really loved that about history. And I loved learning about the actually not just the history itself, the events themselves, but the people who are writing the history and how history was written and the perspectives that go into that. And so I ended up uh, very, very early on getting into research and into historical research. And I ended up getting really interested in the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And then what I discovered was, hey, and my family, like I said, we're both refugees from Vietnam, and my father had served in the South Vietnamese Navy during the war. And I realized that perspective was overlooked in in all of the history books I was being taught. And also in the films. And so I got really interested in that. And that's actually when, as a sophomore, I started to do original research. And my father helped introduce me to veterans, to South Vietnamese veterans who shared their story. And I ended up actually writing a thesis based on interviews with 40 South Vietnamese veterans about their perspective of the Vietnam War.
Can you capitalize that for us? Can you put it
Mhm.
in a kind of help me? I'm intrigued now. You've got me
Yeah,
interested.
yeah, yeah.
Tell
Well,
me what were your takeaways as you interviewed those 40 guys and you did this unique research? What did you
so I'll
learn?
say this: the way that the Vietnam War is portrayed in the U.S. is that it's between the Vietnamese and the Americans. And the Vietnamese are de facto the North Vietnamese, the communists. The people who get left out are the South Vietnamese,
Mm,
and Americans were our allies. And so even though it's our war, we actually get written out of the story of the war.
wow.
Right. And so if you look at things like Apocalypse Now or Good Morning Vietnam, you see like where are the South Vietnamese? It's like very American centered. So that's
Yeah.
one of the big findings. And then in the other one, it's just that a lot of veterans I talked to, they just wanted to, it was, well, we lost, and yet we've also lost our place in the history of this war. And so they just wanted to be able to talk about the complexities and all the different stories and feelings and mixed feelings that they had in serving. And I'm not a political historian, so I don't like to go, why did people lose and what were the political forces? And
Right.
for me, I'm much more interested in like what were people's memories and why do we remember what we remember? And it's not about,
Mm,
I mean, even just, I guess my big takeaway is we focus too much on the lessons. When people are like, oh, what are the let's get the lessons of the Vietnam War, not do that again, as if we won't repeat mistakes. And
yeah.
I don't think that's the point.
Right.
We are, because like wars happen,
That's right.
right? Because yeah, wars happen because bad things happen, right? And so wars are going to happen, and it's more of how do we recognize that people are experiencing different things
Mm.
through these
So
different events. We have different memories.
here's my question. I'm
Mhm.
going to shoot ahead a little bit
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's something I wanted to ask you about.
Mhm.
But these men that you interviewed from South
Mhm.
Vietnam, they were forgotten.
Mhm.
It was their war. I mean,
Mhm.
we were just the allies, right? And then did you get the overwhelming feeling that they felt? And I don't want to, I'm not trying to minimize what they went through at all, but was it disrespect because even though they lost, and like you said, wars will happen, but
Mhm.
is one of the real issues here that we disrespected a whole group of people, a whole, country, South Vietnamese, by cutting them out of their own war? I mean, help me.
Yeah, yes, cutting the not remembering their part, right? Not honoring their, like, why we fought in the first place. I mean, sometimes I'll talk to people who's like, oh, I'm sorry what oh, you're Vietnamese, I'm sorry what we did to you. It's like, we were fighting on the same side,
Hmm,
right? Like, and you were actually helping us. so and so yes. So I would say that it's that feeling of being forgotten. It's and for some also feeling betrayed too.
sure.
Mhm.
And as you look and study history as a historian, um, in the areas that you have researched, how how accurate are we in what you have been taught, what we're teaching in our schools? In your opinion, are we fairly accurate in our history, or are we not accurate in our history?
So, I mean, Larry, you're kind of getting at that. Is it true or not? And it goes back to truth and into that
Okay,
tension, right?
keep me in line, Julie.
And so I think it's more about how we share different perspectives.
Different,
That's because it's
beautifully
not,
put. That is so
it's
beautifully
not, and
said.
because I really think that we're going to have different memories. I lived in Vietnam while was working on my PhD, and um, and the way that the war is remembered there is completely different, right? Because it's communist Vietnam. And those memories and those experiences are also legitimate. So
Yes.
it's just like what it shows is like we will remember and have different experiences. And how do we be curious enough to want to understand that whatever we think is the truth might not be the only truth?
Mm, mm. So how important is being curious? Is that
Oh,
important?
oh my gosh. I mean, the name of my company is curiosity based.
Here you
So I
go,
think
softball to you, right?
and actually, so after I left academia and I came back to Seattle and helped run my family's Vietnamese newspaper, and I started to do a lot of community building.
Mm,
And in that, um, I'm bringing together people, volunteers. And what I discovered was some people did really well and other people really struggled. And I got to tell you, Larry, I was one of the people who really struggled in the beginning. I really struggled because I was so focused on what are we doing here? What's the outcome? How are we going to get that? How are we going to achieve that? And if we didn't, I was like pretty grumpy. So, why are we here? Why are we spending all this time on icebreakers and getting to know each other? Right. And what I learned over time was that the people gravitated to those who took joy in learning and
mm,
discovery
mm.
and making time for like, wow, yeah, we didn't get what we thought, or maybe what we thought we wanted has changed. And how do we be curious about that? And I now actually think of curiosity as a practice. I used
Mm,
to think of it as a trait. I mean, I think usually we describe it as something, be curious. You just got to have some curiosity, right? And I actually now describe it as a practice. And what I mean by that is I liken it to meditation.
mm.
Meditation, it looks easy,
You're
but it's
right.
really hard, right?
Right.
And so there are going to be days where it's actually easier for me to practice curiosity than other days. And so sometimes I'm going to be able to practice curiosity, be open and to listen carefully. And other days, I just don't agree and I don't want to be open or I want to persuade. I mean,
Yeah.
how often have we been in a conversation where it's like, I
Yeah.
know that we disagree and I'm just going to listen for the points that I can then like counter.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen to react. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's yeah, that so we don't, how often do we not listen to understand, but listen to respond?
Yeah.
And so that's why I mean, I actually think we kind of take curiosity for granted. And it's actually a lot harder. It's a lot harder than um than it looks. And so what I try to do is kind of acknowledge the times when I'm not practicing curiosity. I mean, Larry, I've walked out at intermission on plays that I didn't like or performances I didn't like, right? I was not curious enough or I didn't read the end of the book because I was like, no, it's not good.
Yep. Yep. I tell you, we talk a lot about growth mindsets. And I think that part of a growth mindset is to remain curious. And so many times I don't allow myself to get there because I've already predetermined my opinion before and quite frankly, it's lazy. It's because I'm too lazy to really struggle with, learning something I think I already know, or I think I already have an opinion on, right?
Yeah. But Larry, I mean, we also have to give ourselves grace because sometimes we are, and you call it lazy. Sometimes I'm like, I'm just tired.
We're at okay.
I'm
Yeah.
just tired. I don't because again, practicing
I love it.
curiosity can take effort, right? And we can't, I just think it's unrealistic to expect us to be curious all the time. Can we practice curiosity can we reserve that energy for when we think it's going to really matter?
Mm. You know, you're brilliant. You have such wisdom, Julie, and I love what you said. We have to give ourselves grace sometimes. Um, I could talk to you all day, but I need to get to another thing because it's really important as we get through this. We may come
I
back
feel
and
the
do
same way
this.
about you too, Larry. So
Can we come back and do this again
yes,
though?
yes.
I'd love to, Julie. So this is an incredible book that you have written. Amazing, amazing. And we want you to take a minute and tell us about how you got it. Then I have a question for you about it
Mhm.
in just a minute. But tell us a little bit about this book.
Okay, so 7 forms of respect. The idea here is that we can agree on what respect feels like, and we'll disagree on what it looks like. We may not agree on what it looks like.
Mm,
And so, for example, maybe you want to be maybe you want me to CC you on all emails, but I'm like, why would I'm only going to CC you on emails that I think you should read, and yet you're like, no, I just want that FYI. Whereas I'm like, information on a need to know basis only, right? And
right,
so some people will feel disrespected if they're not added to an email, and some people will feel disrespected if they are added to emails,
right.
right? Because like, why are you wasting my time? So what it's about that we all respect is actually contradictory. It's
Mm,
relative. It's subjective,
mm,
um, and it's dynamic. And yet the way we talk about respect as if it's fixed and universal, right? We
Wow.
say, I want you to respect me.
You're right.
And what we're not getting at is like, we have different ideas of what that means.
Mm,
And then here is the other thing, you know, I shared how I belong to all these different groups, right? The thing is, we all belong to different communities, identities, and cultures at the same time,
yeah.
right? There's so many different Venn diagram, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and all of that is impacting how I think about respect and how I interact with people, different people. And
Right.
so, I wanted to write a book that was not prescriptive. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of sometimes leadership books can say, go do this.
Right.
This is how you
Yeah. 5
should
tips,
be.
3 keys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Got it.
right. Yeah. And this is like, actually, I wanted this book to help people explain, oh, why am I doing what I'm doing? And
Mm,
going back to the practicing curiosity part, because I think of curiosity having the practice of curiosity having 3 elements. The first being self-awareness, the second is relationship building, and the third is clear communication.
mm,
And so that first part is, how do I think about respect? Who and what has influenced how I think about respect? And if I can realize that I have my personal stories behind that,
mhm.
then I can accept that maybe someone else has different stories that inform how
Mhm.
they think about it. And that I can actually, rather than being like, you disrespected me, it's like, well, how do you see respect? Because maybe we're seeing it differently.
That's so good, Julie. One size does not fit all. Would you would you talk a little bit about the rubber band theory?
Yes.
Will you talk about that?
Yes. And I have a rubber band here.
I love it.
So it's in contrast, or just the golden rule. That's how most people talk about respect. Treat people how you want to be treated, right? And the question there is, what if someone doesn't want to be treated the way you want to be treated? So I think if there's the rubber band rule, which is actually shows we're flexible as humans. We can flex. We can accommodate. Oh, I know Larry likes this, so I'll do that. Even though I'm kind of ambivalent about it, but I know it matters to Larry, right?
Mm,
And so, and we can stretch. But what happens over time is maybe there's some things we actually don't care about, that we don't like. And yet we find ourselves doing it to accommodate other people because we want to please other people. And what will
mm,
happen is we'll snap and break
mm,
like a rubber band. And so with the rubber band rule, it's about understanding, what are my breaking points?
mm.
What's going to make
So
me
good.
snap? Because I got to name that for myself. I got
Yes.
to know that for myself. And then be able to, I have to name it for myself before I share it with someone else. And because oftentimes what I hear people say is like, they're being disrespectful. Well, why? Well, because they just were. They're not able to name, we're not able to name like, what were the behaviors that
Mhm.
upset me? How often have we seen people leave workplaces that was like, that workplace was toxic, but we're not actually able to know, we never expressed why or what's happening.
Yeah.
So,
And recognizing that breaking point, I guess, helps us to be more holistic in our own being and
mhm.
able to continue to be flexible if we know what those breaking points. That's
Yeah,
brilliant. I
yeah.
love that.
We
And then
have to
what?
know our boundaries. We have to know our
Boundaries. That's
boundaries.
the word. Yes, that's the word I
Yes,
was looking for.
right?
So it's
Before we snap and
understanding those
break,
boundaries. Yeah.
instead of like, no, I can stretch a little more because I am so accommodating, right? And I
Yeah.
mean, how often, you see people who are like, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay that you're late. No problem. I've just been
Right.
waiting here for like, right?
Right.
Mhm,
Which leads to even more toxicity in the relationship.
mhm,
Wow.
mhm.
You are brilliant. I'm going to tell you, Julie, I am looking forward to us continuing and having conversation. Unfortunately, our time is up for this podcast, but your insight, your wisdom, I'm excited. This book, amazing around respect. I've learned so much today. Thank you for being a bit vulnerable and sharing with us some of your past and some of the things that you had to overcome and how you've used that to become the leader you are today and helping us all to understand respect and the rubber band rule. I love that. I'll take that with me. Dr. Julie Pham, you are amazing. Thank you for joining us today on Crossing the Line.
Thank you so much, Dr. Larry Little. So